After a month of battling for the most expensive piece of legislation in U.S. history, President Obama executed a high-speed political "you do it." It's belt-tightening week in Washington. President Obama kicked off the festivities today with a fiscal responsibility summit attended by members of both parties. Now on the agenda, the president's plan to slash the federal deficit in half by 2013. He says he can do it. More on that momentarily with our guest, former Labor Secretary Robert Reich. Not on the official agenda, the president made what could be interpreted as a reminder to congressional Republicans about who is the boss, with a capital B. With members of his cabinet behind him, President Obama ended the summit by gathering the attendees, labor unions, top economists and lawmakers on both sides, including Republicans John McCain and Eric Cantor, well, to a press conference setting. Let the stagecraft begin.
We all know how large the defense budget is. We all know that the cost overruns. Your helicopter is now going to cost as much as Air Force One. I don't think that there's any more graphic demonstration of how good ideas have cost taxpayers an enormous amount of money.
I've already talked to Gates about a thorough review of the helicopter situation. The helicopter I have now seems perfectly adequate to me. Of course, I've never had a helicopter before.
Well played, Mr. McCain. President Obama then moved on to the number 2 Republican in the House and possibly his loudest critic, Congressman Eric Cantor, the man who was instrumental in securing the unanimous House Republican no to the stimulus package. And apparently the president is on a first-name basis with the loyal opposition.
Eric, you got some thoughts?
Mr. President, I too want to thank you very much for having us. It is a great opportunity, I think, for us to really come together on some of these very, very big issues. You said before when we were in discussions on the stimulus debate that we're going to have some very tough choices to make. And we look forward to your address tomorrow night and working through some of these very big issues, as well as trying to address what's on Secretary Geithner's plate in the immediate as far as the bank fix, the housing fix, and others.
Thanks. Max?
Oh, if only thought bubbles were real. What if Congressman Eric would just say to Mr. President's face what he was thinking? And what if we really knew what the president's response meant besides move on, which he did, eventually to Republican Congressman Joe Barton of Texas, who suggested that the Democrats in the House were not inclusive of the Republicans in the recovery bill process. President Obama offered a helpful hint.
On the one hand, the majority has to be inclusive. On the other hand, the minority has to be constructive. What you should see, I think, is the majority saying, what are your ideas? The minority's got to then come up with those ideas and not just want to blow the thing up.
Got it? Finally, President Obama accepted Democratic Senator Thomas Carper of Delaware's suggestion that he continue to reach out to the minority party. Senator Carper compared it to the parable of sowing seeds and that his seeds would eventually find fertile soil. President Obama found the opportunity to do what in comedy is known as the callback at Congressman Cantor's expense.
Well, I will certainly do that, Tom, because I'm just a glutton for punishment, and I'm going to keep on talking to Eric Cantor someday, sooner or later. He's going to say, boy, Obama had a good idea. It's going to happen. You watch.
Now, to his point, a New York Times poll reveals 3/4 of Americans think Obama has been trying to work with Republicans. But only 3 in 10 Americans said Republicans are doing the same, with 63% saying that Republicans oppose this economic stimulus package primarily for political reasons rather than policy concerns. Tomorrow night, President Obama delivers a State of the Union-like speech to a joint session of Congress. And on Thursday, Mr. Obama releases the outlines of his first budget. So what do we already know about Obama's era of fiscal responsibility? Well, the president will forego some of the budget, shall we say, choices that the President Bush relied on, such as not including the cost of wars or natural disaster emergency relief.
For too long, our budget process in Washington has been an exercise in deception, a series of accounting tricks to hide the extent of our spending and the shortfalls in our revenue, and hope that the American people won't notice.
Transparency. As for the president's plan to cut the deficit in half by 2013?
We cannot and will not sustain deficits like these without end. Contrary to the prevailing wisdom in Washington these past few years, we cannot simply spend as we please and defer the consequences to the next budget, the next administration, or the next generation.
Given the massive spending now necessitated by the recession, the news today that the government might take as much as 40% of Citigroup in exchange for a massive infusion of capital. Can President Obama do two things at once that are seemingly contradictory? Announcing plans to cut the deficit in half after passing a stimulus bill. Is it kind of like having abstinence education the day after the prom? Joining me now is Robert Reich, the former Labor Secretary under President Clinton and now a professor at the University of California at Berkeley. Professor Reich, thank you so much for taking the time tonight.
Well, good evening, Allison. It is possible for the president to do two things that seem contrary at the same time. In fact, he might be able to do 3 or 4 things that seem contrary. With that kind of approval record, he can do almost anything.
Well, let me ask you, the president today announced some big goals to cut down the deficit, including rising tax rates on the wealthy, reducing our troops in Iraq. What else can he plan that could cut that deficit by so very much?
Of course, the big monster in the center of the room that nobody wants to talk about right now is not Social Security, it is Medicare. Medicare costs are eating up a huge portion of the budget, and even when and if the economy turns up, there's going to be a hell to pay with regard to Medicare. So that's a big issue that presumably he should and probably wants to begin to tackle.
No, what worked in reducing the deficit when you were in the Clinton administration?
Well, we went through the budget line by line and cut out all of those things that you might call, what every president calls, waste, fraud, and abuse. We also postponed a lot of the big public investments that Bill Clinton wanted to make in 1993, 1994. But, Allison, remember, those times were markedly different from right now. Right now, we're going into an ever-deepening recession. The government has got to spend money just to keep people employed. In 1993, 1994, at the start of Bill Clinton's administration, we were coming out of recession. And inflation was the big enemy, not recession or worse.
It's such a huge number to think to get down to just over $500 billion in 4 years. Can he do it?
If everything goes absolutely right, if the economy turns around, if we don't need another stimulus package, if we don't need more bank bailouts, if, in fact, everybody gets paid back because the banks are doing better and the auto companies are doing better, if there is really sort of sunny times ahead, then we can get it down to $500 or so billion.
I counted 4 ifs in that answer, though.
Well,
that's a lot of ifs.
I was going to give you about 8 more ifs. Because it's a very iffy proposition. You know, Allison, I think it makes sense politically in the short term for the president to make that promise or show that aspiration, the audacity of hope, as it were, because he's going to be unveiling his budget for next year. And Tim Geithner may be coming back to Congress wanting even more money for Wall Street. And there are a lot of big bills coming out and a lot of money to pay. So he's got to get the support not so much of Republicans, but of blue dog Democrats, conservative Democrats who are very concerned about budget deficits. And that was today's performance. I think that's what he's trying to, those are the people he's trying to reassure.
Yeah, I have to ask you about that. What did you make of this event this afternoon, the president calling on Senator McCain and Representative Cantor? He was like he was a student, he was a teacher, and they were students, and he was calling on them in class. Was it effective?
Well, it was enormously effective. I mean, for President Obama to be standing there in command of the class and for John McCain, Senator McCain, to be there in the 6th row, called on, even though he was the first one to be asked if he had something to say, it was as if, yes, you're absolutely right, as if the president was the professor and everybody else a student. He maintained throughout, I thought Obama maintained not only good humor, even joking with the Republicans, but more importantly, a sense that he was completely and totally in control and in command. And he's not only commander-in-chief of the military, he's commander-in-chief of the economy. And there was no doubt about that today.
Robert Reich, Labor Secretary under President Clinton, and now a professor himself at the University of California at Berkeley. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thanks, Allison. Bye-bye.